Guest host Vince Tinnirello is here to discuss the 2020 state of the channel, putting the co into managed services and some news from Sophos and Untangle. Plus, we discuss network vendor diversity with Auvik's Alex Hoff. It's ChannelPro Weekly, episode 135, Bright Shiny Objects. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 135. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this great audio and video program for the MSPs, the VARs, the integrators, the IT resellers, the managed security service providers. Basically, if your job function or company is like a whole string of acronyms together, you're likely in the right place. Joining me this week and most weeks is the man who I keep trying to convince him to just turn his name into an acronym because I think it would be a lot easier for the world, but he still likes his whole name, executive editor Rich Freeman.
Hello. You know, we work with somebody, our good buddy Joel Zapespinner, who goes by JZ. So this can actually be done. Maybe I should try out RF.
You'd have to do, the problem with RF is because it also stands for radio frequency, and I think that might confuse people a little bit.
Yes.
And when people say like RFID, RFID, you know, they're going to start asking you for your driver's license, and that's just going to be really confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You know, the Rich Freeman ID. So, but maybe EERF might work for executive editor Rich Freeman.
Okay.
ERF, that might be easier. I don't know. Someone who can settle this debate is our guest host today. We're so excited to have him on. He is the CEO of Anchor Network Solutions, Vince Tinnirello. Say hello, Vince.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you here. We are so excited. For those who are in our audience that may not be familiar with you or with your company, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'm with Anchor Network Solutions. We're an MSP that is located in Denver, Colorado. We've been in business since 2002. There's 20 of us now. Been doing the MSP thing for a long time. Really enjoy serving clients. I've served a term as the chair of the managed services community for CompTIA, and strong partnership with Autotask and now Datto over the years. And really enjoy the friendships and the relationships I've built in our community. It's a great place to be, and it's why I enjoy giving back.
Very cool. Now, is that the view outside of your back window there, or is that kind of like the view you wish you had?
That is Capitol Peak, which is a 14,000-foot peak mountain just outside of Aspen. And in the winter, I like to ski. In the summer, I like to mountain bike and climb mountains. And that was probably my favorite mountain to climb and summits. So seems like a good backdrop for Zoom as opposed to the rest of my office.
Yeah, very cool. So you say you do mountain biking, do mountain climbing. How many? I mean, you're in the perfect area for that, obviously. But yeah. How many have you done?
So there are 55, depending on who you ask, there are between 53 and 55 peaks in Colorado over 14,000 feet. Some might even say there are 58. Some are on the official list, some aren't. And just to be safe, I've done all 58 named ones. So I did all the official ones and then did a few extra credits just in case anyone ever said to me like, well, did you do this one? That's named and above 14,000. So check, yes, been there. So that's kind of a goal of mine. And I did it over a long period of time. And now I'm doing them from different routes, bringing people up them, doing a few extra credit mountains with them, like combining them. Yeah, it's fun. I do a few a summer.
Wow, that's incredible. So you have all the gear, and is it like a free climbing kind of thing, or I'm not a mountain climber, so I don't know how all that works.
Well, some are just a walk up to the top. The one behind me, Capitol, involved using a short rope, which is almost like a dog leash, and a partner, so that if you went one way, he went the other, and could hold on to you, and vice versa. So it's not rock climbing, but there are some class 4 moves where you are going up a defined route using handholds and footholds, but it's not like setting an anchor on a wall or anything like that. Most of it has some kind of scrambling or climbing, as in like ascending a ladder almost, in fairly defined hand and footholds.
So you're not making them yourself per se. These routes are already kind of set up in most cases.
You're making them. You're looking at what works for you, but it's not a sheer straight wall. I've had to use a fixed rope and anchors on one where there was snow. I was with a guide, and we didn't expect there to be snow. I've used a guide a handful of times, and we had to use crampons. But it was sketchier. It was the 4th of July, and we got into an area where we didn't expect there to be any snow, but we had the gear, had to set some anchors with some cams and then clip into them. And that was a pretty cool experience. So anyway, but most of them are less technical. It's about exposure. That peak behind me, there's a lot of exposure going across that ridge, and you've got to be comfortable with an airy sense of adventure and being at altitude with 2,000 foot drop exposures on either side.
Wow. And do you have like a routine or a ritual that you follow when you get to the top? Do you like put your hands in the air or plant a flag or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, they used to there is the U.S. Geological. There are site surveys at the top and sign-ins where you can sign in with the Colorado 14er Initiative. Other than signing in, no. I mean, I have a pretty good routine to when I want to get up to the summit, when I want to get off by, and routine of what I'm bringing with me and being very careful that way. And as Colorado's population continues to increase, it sounds a little snob factor, but it's amateur hour, and everyone starts out amateur hour. I moved from Florida to Colorado, but we see a lot of people making bad decisions. So I'm very old school with meaning like, doesn't matter that the forecast is for not a cloud in the sky. I'm going to pack like I have to spend the night on the mountain, right? That's just something that I do routine every single time, even if it means carrying extra gear on what's supposed to be a perfect day. I'm still doing it. But no celebration routine at the top. That's other than a summit photo or two with a friend who usually I climb with.
So cool. I have one more question because I find this absolutely fascinating. I'm sure it wildly varies depending on the size and type of mountain, but what's the maybe average length of time it takes to climb one of these? And what was the longest that you had trying to get up one of these?
A lot of times it's an 8 to 12 hour day, and you're starting at 5 a.m. And you just think about that peak behind me, which was the biggest thing I learned moving from Florida is, when you're in Florida, you're literally at sea level, you're on a boat and you're like, oh, look, there's lightning and it's going to strike the water right down here. When you're on the top of that summit, lightning is happening around you, not above you. You're in it. And so the hair will stand up on your arms. Like you can hear the sizzle and the electricity, right? So I want to be down and leaving a summit, ideally no later than 10, but I often want to be even off there by 9:30. And I want to be the first one on top of that mountain is pretty important to me. The longest day I had was the worst day I had, where I was climbing 2 peaks together. And I was on the mountain over 18 hours. We started at 4 and we rolled into camp at 10 p.m. And I was out of water. And I thought I might have a nervous breakdown on the mountain because it was the day that we had all of that snow. And it just were conditions we didn't expect. And it was mentally exhausting, but persevered through it. And for a while, that was at 14er number 50 and 51. I wasn't sure that I wanted to finish because it was a little bit of shell shock there of, holy crap, that was a bad day. And the only good thing was the good weather, but we just kept having obstacle after obstacle thrown in front of us, and I just wasn't prepared for that. So one of the interesting things about climbing that I found is there is no easy 14er. There are easier, and even the easiest 14er, difficulty-wise, can be made ridiculously hard based on weather and conditions. So you always treat the mountain with respect and know, like, hey, today, the hardest 14er can seem easier because you have perfect conditions, and the easiest one can be made like, brutally hard. So it was a humbling 18-hour day on the mountain.
Wow, absolutely fascinating. Now, Rich, when you're ascending these giant, tall buildings in Seattle, do you bring extra gear in case you get stuck making that climb up the stairwell?
Well, I make sure to have oxygen with me at least, because yeah, if I get above the third floor, basically, I'm going to be short of breath. Actually, I'm curious about that, Vince. Like 14,000 feet, I have no idea. I mean, how high do you have to get before you do need extra oxygen?
You know, if I mean, I see people coming from Texas, from Kansas, from Florida. No one's bringing the Mount Everest oxygen mask and tank, but I do see people with the canisters that they sell. They sell them in ski towns. I would tell you that it affects everyone differently. I've taken some first aid classes, some alpine first aid classes and avalanche classes. Like I have no idea. It varies by person. So it could hit me at 17,000 feet. It just depends. So for me, I can tell you that I notice at 14,000 feet, you and I can have a conversation, but if we're walking, it's like I'm jogging, right? And air gets thinner and you're breathing. You're like, man, I just can't get any air in. It's definitely thinner. So you got to stay hydrated and take a few Advil. But at 14,000 feet, I've known people to get vertigo and get dizzy. So we've got to be really careful where they are on the mountain. Like you don't want somebody on a exposed ridge who gets dizzy and tumbles. But if they're on a walk up on the shoulder of the mountain, they get a little dizzy, sit down, have something to eat, have some water. So I'd say it affects people differently, but tree line is at just under 12,000 feet. It's like 11.7. That's about where you start to see people, if it's going to affect them, get them, is like right at tree line.
Wow, crazy. Well, fascinating hobby that you have. And we could talk about all that all day long, but then we'd have to change the show to, Mountain Climbers Weekly. So
that's right.
But so for those out there who are listening and are interested, and we'll give you Vince's contact info if you want to learn more about his mountain climbing adventures or ask him any questions about that. So, Rich, we've got a lot coming up in the news here, and a great show ahead. So, a few different stories that we have. One involving Ingram Micro, one involving Sophos, and Tangled is in the news, which is one we don't talk about all that often. We got a great big story that we're going to talk about, which is the 2020 State of the Channel. I've been looking forward to this. We've got an interview coming up with Alex Hoff from Auvik. And of course, we'll play 5 questions with Vince if time allows. I don't even know if he knows that's coming or not. And all kinds of stuff. So Rich, why don't we go ahead and dive into the news? The first is, this is the kind of story we don't talk about that much. Normally these role kind of changes are very uninteresting to people, but if we're talking about it, it must be significant. So someone quit or got fired or is leaving. What happened?
Is leaving, was certainly not fired.
They're fired. They're fired. Okay.
This story actually broke last week. This broke, or at least I heard about it, a few hours after we recorded our last episode, and I had a story up on it last Friday morning. And you're right, we don't normally write about personnel news at least focus on it heavily. But this one involves a very well-known, very prominent cloud computing executive at Ingram Micro, Renee Bergeron. Has announced that actually last Friday, February 14th, was her last day at the company after roughly 10 years, I guess about 9.5 years at Ingram Micro. And so for anyone who works with Ingram and has been doing anything in the cloud with Ingram, Renee is a very well-known figure there. The company has been doing these Cloud Summit events in the spring for a bunch of years now, and she always kind of hosts and keynotes those. So just kind of an interesting shakeup there. She's someone who has been very closely associated with Ingram and cloud computing. For me, it was just sort of a nice, the thing that was striking about this and that just sort of made me feel like it was worth calling attention to is it's just kind of a nice opportunity to talk about the ways that the big vendors, the big distributors out there have adjusted to the change in their marketplace, right? So 10 years ago, September 2010, I believe, is when Renee joined Ingram Micro. And the companies like Ingram Micro were very much in the pick, pack, and ship era of distribution at that time. They all knew, though, that the world was changing around them, and the question was, what could they do to remain relevant down the road? And Ingram's strategy, there have been different answers to that question. Ingram very much made the decision early on that we're going to be the best cloud computing distributor on the market. We're going to have the biggest selection of vendors. We're going to have a marketplace tool that our partners can use to resell software as a service and infrastructure as a service products to their customers. And they went out. I mean, they built a lot of that stuff in-house, but they went out and they spent $500 million over the course of 8-9 years acquiring other companies as well and building this giant platform. And she was very much, Renee Bergeron was very much at the heart of that effort and steering that effort and certainly the public face of that effort. You know, we don't necessarily know a lot. We don't get a lot of breakout numbers from Ingram in terms of the cloud business and what it's doing for them. But we do know that, you know, they've had a fair amount of success in cloud with that strategy, and they've certainly transitioned successfully, as far as we can tell, from the old era of distribution to the new one. She certainly deserves a lot of credit for that in terms of what Ingram has done, and there are people like her at, you know, Tech Data and Synex and D&H as well. So for me, it was kind of a milestone moment as we enter a new decade, you know, and a chance to look back at what the distributors did to make a future for themselves in the last decade.
Now, Vince, as someone who's been an MSP for a long time, you could probably speak, not maybe specifically to Ingram Micro or this person's impact there, but just on what Rich is saying about how distribution has just rapidly changed a lot over the last 10 years. Have you noticed that? Have you seen that? Do you use distribution differently than you used to?
You know, yes and no. We worked traditionally with Ingram, with Synex, and purchasing direct from Dell. They've been a great partner for us. People either love or hate them, neither here nor there. And I would say over time, our people that do the purchasing, they're still buying a bunch from Ingram. Honestly, I respect what Ingram tried to do, but I think we were in the middle of too much of Ingram and Synex trying to figure it out and not doing an awesome job with it. And not that anyone else had it figured out in terms of around cloud services. And at times for me, it was like, well, why would we even bother going through them? I mean, we did Office 365 and the CSP program through Synex. Ingram was trying to get us to work with them. Neither one was really all that awesome. We did buy some Office 365 migration tools through Ingram. That was good, but we never really saw the benefit of buying through them. The vision, I think, was a great idea, but at times it almost didn't make sense. The first vendor to seem to have really figured it out is Pax8 here in Denver. All of a sudden, and I joke that when they first came around and they were hammering us with phone calls, I'm like, why would we ever buy from them? But they did something that forced us to buy from them in a good way, which was build an Office 365 integration directly to our PSA, which is Autotask, and where they shined with that, and they shined with being our Azure experts. So to try and be specific in answering your question, I watched the cloud distribution like Synex and Ingram try and do some things, but I just never saw them get it completely. And so we tried going down paths with them individually and then steered away from it because it just didn't make a lot of sense for us.
It's interesting though that because I was going to ask about Pax8, you know, it could be that the problem is just that a cloud distribution model doesn't really work as well as the distributors think, or it could be that it's harder for an old line distributor like Ingram to make that switch versus a company like Pax8, which has really only been around for a few years, totally born in the cloud. It sounds like there is a difference basically between working with a bigger, more established distributor in cloud computing and somebody like Pax8, who that's just kind of what they do, and you know, all they've ever done since they were born.
So that is exactly it, Rich. So here's how it went with a distributor. Rep comes to see us. Here's all the stuff we can do for you. We have this new cloud department. Okay, well, we're interested in Microsoft Office 365, this, and this. But we don't know anything about Azure. We don't know how to sell it. We don't know how to use it. Okay, well, let me hook you up with this person and that person and this person. And we just get sent off to Yaya land. And there's no subject matter expert of how to sell it, how to license it. Like we couldn't get to the right people to help us all the way through. It was because these companies are so big, we were sprayed and prayed everywhere, right? Then Pax 8 comes in and says, all right, we have expertise. And in fact, we'll charge you for it, but we'll help you with your first Azure deployment. We'll help you set these things up in Microsoft Teams with Office 365. We'll help you with best practices for Azure infrastructure. We'll supplement your deployment team with some consulting hours. Like, just hold your hand from A to Z, from sale and understanding the product all the way down to the end, and even teaching us a little bit, and now helping us with, okay, well, you probably should get Azure certified or Office 365 certified. And that model has just been so much more effective than getting pointed from here to here from the big companies and the old school distributors, because they just didn't have the glue, right, to put it all together. It just was, and it was like, well, hey, you could sell our IBM cloud solution that we have, or you could sell Microsoft's, or you could sell this one. There was no cohesiveness to it. It's what we experienced.
Yeah. Now, I've never actually been to Yala Land, and you've apparently spent some time there. Any good restaurants you could recommend?
Too much time there. It's the land of nowhere.
Rich, so my last question for you. So Miss Bergeron is leaving. Obviously, she made an impact at Ingram. As a two-part question, do you see that impact negatively affecting Ingram going forward, or where do you think she's going to land, and is she going to make an impact somewhere else?
So last question first. We don't know. She has not disclosed where she's going next. The indication last week was that she is leaving Ingram to take another position somewhere, and that's as much as we know. So, you could speculate, and I just have this hunch that given that she's been immersed in the cloud world for so long, I just have this feeling that maybe she's decided it's an interesting time to work for a cloud startup, a smaller cloud company, and have that kind of different sort of, but I don't know. She hasn't said, and we'll be keeping an eye out for that. My guess is at some point, in the relatively short future, we'll find out where she actually landed. In terms of the impact of her departure, it remains to be seen, right? I mean, and a good place to kind of get a feel for that, maybe, at least an initial feel for that, will be the Ingram Micro Cloud Summit this coming May. And we'll kind of see how that whole experience feels without her around there. So I should say her boss, Nimesh Dave, who she was the senior VP of Global Cloud Channel. Nimesh is the executive vice president of Global Cloud, and he's going to be kind of directly running the channel in Europe. Tim Fitzgerald, who reported to Renee before, is going to take over in North America on her role, and so we'll see. If there's any kind of, I don't expect there to be any kind of significant disruption. We'll just see if there's any, near-term change or change of direction around that.
Yeah, I can't imagine people are going to be wandering around the next show, like bumping into walls aimless because she's gone. But we wish her luck and hope that she makes an impact wherever she ends up. So we'll keep an eye on that. Next story, Rich, is about Sophos, who's added some new inspection technologies to one of their firewalls. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm going to actually go ahead and roll together two news stories here because they both concern next-generation firewalls. And one of them, as you say, is from Sophos. The other is from Untangle. And they both made updates within about 24 hours of each other this week. So we'll start.
Are you saying it's a conspiracy, Rich?
I don't know. Do you need more than two to get a conspiracy?
No. Two makes a conspiracy.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks. You heard it here first.
I don't know, Vince. Do you need more than two to have a conspiracy?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Anyway, Rich, continue, please.
We'll go with conspiracy. It's more interesting that way. Yes, there's a next generation firewall update conspiracy, and Sophos is in on it. So what they did is release a new edition of their XG firewall product. The biggest new addition there is that it now has the ability to inspect encrypted traffic, TLS traffic. Now they say, and there's really no way for me or us to verify this. Maybe one of these days, Matt will get a review unit out of them and we can kind of put this to the test. Obviously, there are other firewalls out there that can do TLS decryption. What they say is differentiated about theirs is that they have figured out a way to do this with very little performance overhead. So there are a bunch of firewalls that can do TLS inspection, but the performance overhead is often so high that a lot of companies just turn that feature off to keep the network working well. They say you can turn it on here and you're really not going to notice very much of a difference. And they released some research this week that indicates that that's actually a pretty good thing because, let me get the number here, 23% of malware families currently in circulation are using encryption or encrypted communication of one kind or another. And that number is growing rapidly. So if you're not decrypting TLS traffic, you're leaving your customers or your own network exposed. So that's kind of the big thing, the biggest thing that they do there. The other thing they point out, in addition to the speed that they're decrypting at, is that they say they are looking across a wider range of ports and communication protocols than some of their competitors are, and so giving you more expansive coverage that way. Again, not something that we've been able to verify yet on our end. Let's see what else is in there. So they've got some new policy controls in there that let you prioritize traffic like VoIP traffic or SD-WAN traffic. There are some new tie-ins with their Sophos Central Management Console. So you now have the ability to assign firewalls to groups and assign policies to those groups. There's some new reporting functionality in there that wasn't available before. Some new connectivity with the threat intelligence folks at their Sophos Labs unit. So they are able to kind of draw on some of the artificial intelligence capabilities that Sophos Labs have in some ways to better protect endpoints, and some connectivity with the managed threat response service that Sophos introduced late last year. If you are a subscriber to that sort of outsourced threat hunting and response service now, the analysts supporting you are not only going to be getting endpoint security information, they're going to be getting network security information from the firewall, and they're going to be able to correlate things a little bit more effectively. So, excuse me. That's their side of things. Untangle also has a new next-gen firewall that came out this week. It's been on the market about a year at this point, and it utilizes a model that's kind of similar to what WatchGuard does, in that there are lots of these different apps that you can selectively decide whether or not you want to install in the unit. And they've had apps up there before for web filtering and virus detection and so on. They've added a new one that they are calling the Threat Prevention app. And it's a little bit similar to the web filtering app, but it adds an additional layer of security there. Essentially what they're doing is tapping into an IP address reputation index created and maintained by Webroot, and using that information and correlating it with some other information about associations or apps or files or whatever that you might find on a site that one of your users is going to, they're able to identify if you're or if somebody is navigating to a dangerous site and block them from doing that potentially, if that's how you have the policy set up. So the only way actually in this particular case, there are different subscription options for this Untangled product, which they call NG Firewall. One of those allows you to mix and match which apps you want to buy. The other one is called their NG Firewall Complete subscription. That comes with everything they sell. This threat prevention app is available through the Complete subscription. It's not available on a standalone basis. And so that's their part of the conspiracy.
Well, that's a laundry list of things to talk about. That's for sure.
Indeed. Now,
Vince, the most important question goes to you first. If someone was going to tell me the reputation of your IP address, what kind of reputation would it have?
My IP address? I have no idea. A good one, I hope.
You don't have a reputation for being too funny or too... I don't know. What kind of reputations can IP addresses get in this modern, crazy world?
Tough but hard.
Yeah, we'd have to ask the nerds at my company for that one.
Fair enough. Well, no, that is a big laundry list of stuff to go over. We'll talk about the first one first, and which I think is probably the bigger one that to talk about is TLS and inspection. Now, you manage a lot of networks. Is that something that you have historically not done because of a performance impact, or do you mitigate around that?
I don't know whether we do that or not. I don't think we're quite at that point yet with worrying about inspecting encrypted traffic. All of the firewalls have some level of, the more services you turn on, the more it impacts performance. So having, conversations with clients, I think that's where we're at when they complain about, well, wait a minute, I've got this much bandwidth. Why am I not getting this much speed? Well, when you want to inspect traffic, it's like checking people's tickets as they're going into a concert venue. It's going to slow down. I know you got 6 doors here of ticket takers, but as we have to inspect tickets, it's going to slow down the traffic. I don't know that we have gotten to that level yet of worrying about inspecting encrypted traffic, but we are mindful of network speeds in terms of performance of the devices we use.
So if this was something that you deemed that you wanted to have, would a product that supposedly does it without any performance impact draw you to that? We're just talking about network vendor. We're going to talk a lot about network vendor diversity here and later on. Is this the shiny object?
A year from now, and I say that purposely. That's great, but I want to see it work first. And that's not a Sophos thing. Scott Barlow, he'll want to punch me in the face for even saying that. With any product ever, I think my mantra has always been to anyone we've ever worked with is, that's great you have it, now make sure you tell us when it doesn't suck. Because, things are rushed to market, and I'm not implying that Sophos was, but we typically like to wait some time and let all the bright, shiny object people test it out and make sure it's awesome, and either get a revision 2 or hear that revision 1 is awesome before we would sell it. So to answer your question, no, we would not rush to it. Probably a year from now is when we would get serious about it. We just tell clients, you'll never be bleeding edge tip of the spear. You'll be either on the back of the arrowhead or the very front of the spear itself, but we will never be on the tip. And we prefer to wait and make sure things are awesome before we start using them.
All right. So anything else in these kind of laundry list of new functionalities that we're talking about, either with Sophos or Untangled, some of the filtering options, that prevention apps, any of that notable stand out to you? Anything that you want to point out to MSPs?
Not really. We're real interested in working with security vendors that have a hardware as a service model and standardizing all of our clients on one. And, SonicWall finally got there. Calyptix has had one for years. And I think Untangle, I think they've got one now. It's strange. I remember them years ago, and then I don't know where they disappeared to, and now they're back in terms of awareness. So kind of curious to see what they've got going on.
All right. Well, we will move on from news and talk about a big one, Rich. This is one that I know takes a little bit of time to put together, and I'll let you speak to that. But the 2020 State of the Channel report is here. Rich, tell us about that.
Yeah, no, this is definitely one of those big milestones on the calendar here at ChannelPro. Every year we go out and we survey hundreds of our readers on a whole bunch of different topics in terms of business conditions and how you're running the company, who you're hiring, what kind of markets you're competing in, and are those markets growing, shrinking, what have you, how profitable are they? So we collect a whole big pile of data. And because I'm a data nerd, I look forward to this every year. I get to dive into this giant spreadsheet full of information and try, at least, to tease out some trends and some information, see what kind of changed year over year there. And that's our State of the Channel survey. And like you say, the 2021 just went up on channelpronetwork.com this week.
And what's in it?
On the edge of your seat, I can tell. So every year, basically, what I try to do is kind of come up with what I think of as the headline item there. I sort of imagine that if we were actually publishing a press release about this year's State of the Channel survey, what would be the thing that we would call out in the headline there that's sort of most interesting? And the answer I came up with basically was that if you kind of root around in the data a little bit there, it really kind of establishes something that we were beginning to see in last year's study, which is that after all of these years of talking about managed services, talking about cloud computing as we just were, we really have reached a point at which those technologies, those markets, we can, I think, officially refer to them as mature markets at this point, which is not to say that there isn't a lot of growth yet to come, because there is in both of those areas, and they're still growing enormously. And with respect to managed services, that's why all this private equity money is flooding into the market right now. And so these are huge growth areas still. And there are still plenty of channel pros out there who are doing break-fix work and haven't really begun making that move to managed services yet. But these are no longer the up-and-coming markets. These are markets that have really established themselves. And I'll just take a look at some data from the survey to kind of tell you where I'm coming from on that. So 65% of the readers we surveyed in 2019 in the previous survey were doing at least some managed services. It's up to 82% now. 77% of the readers in this year's survey are selling things like networking gear and PCs. Just to kind of put that in perspective, 82% are doing managed services, 77% are doing networking right now. That's how sort of established managed services has become. This is interesting. 47% of the people we surveyed this year said that managed services is a high margin market for them. It was 35% just a year ago at this point. That's a sign of maturity, right? People are figuring out how to do this in a profitable way. Cloud computing, the portion of our readership that's making at least half of its revenue from the cloud has more than doubled in a year. Now, it's still a modest number, but a year ago it was 8%. Now we're at 18%. Fast rising number there, but there's a growing number of people out there who are actually not just doing cloud as part of what they do, but it's actually maybe the biggest thing that they do. 69% of folks in the survey doing some combination of cloud consulting, deployment, migration, in addition to just sort of selling the seats. So 69% this year, it was 55% just a year ago. And the margins maybe are not necessarily enormous on that, but only 19% of people said that the margins on those consulting services they deliver are low. And then, and this was kind of encouraging to me. So, one way of measuring maturity in the cloud particularly is, are people moving beyond Office 365 and even at this point Azure, infrastructure as a service, into some of the other somewhat more demanding, more sophisticated cloud markets. And we're seeing some of that too. So 28% of the folks we polled this year are doing online CRM from Salesforce or Microsoft or somebody else like that. That's all the way up from 17% a year ago. 23% are doing some kind of cloud-based ERP. That's more than double, up from 11% the year before. It's not easy to break into those markets, but they're very high profit markets. And as we see that growth in our readership, it tells you that people are diversifying, they're getting deeper into cloud computing. So that's there's a lot more we can talk about, but that's sort of like the headline I thought from this year's study is there's all sorts of evidence in there that managed services and cloud really have taken root and become mature segments for channel pros.
Yeah, now Vince, I wouldn't have expected you to read all of the numbers here because it's a lot to dive into, but kind of based on some of the numbers that Richard's saying, are your feelings kind of lining up with that? Is your business lining up with where those numbers are falling, or where do you disagree?
I'd say so. Cloud is always a hard one, right, to ascertain, like, is that an accurate number? What I'm getting at is, so I'm in a peer group and I facilitate a peer group for MSP Ignite, and we track some metrics And we've had a lot of conversation around what's cloud revenue to me may not be cloud revenue to you. How do you pull out what you bundle in to when you're trying to measure your cloud business? So for example, do you consider Datto BCDR, and I'm just using them as an example because it's something we have. It has an on-premise component and it has a cloud backup. Is that a cloud service? One MSP says yes, the other one says no, right? So in pieces and measuring of your business, it's sometimes it can be challenging to make sure you've got apples to apples. We're tracking our cloud revenue around Office 365, cloud file sync and share, any pure cloud, what we consider a pure cloud service, Azure, things of that nature, email filtering, right? Just pure cloud stuff. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think the MSP market itself, managed services, has matured. And I don't know that, we keep saying, oh, commoditization. Yeah, a little, but right now it's more of okay, now we have to continue of like, why are you different? What makes you different? Is it your proven process? Because before it was, well, we do CIO services. That has now moved into a Me Too category. Everyone's doing it. Cloud service, it's just a matter of doing it well. I still see a contingency of people that want to white label everything, which makes no sense to me at all. I want you to know it's Datto. I want you to know it's Microsoft. I want you to know it's whether it's Rackspace, whoever it may be, right? So there's still some interesting stuff there. But I think we see people that are getting good at cloud, and then obviously security is charging forward, which is a pretty generic term of security. And I think we're all still trying to figure that out in very specific cases. But yeah, overall, I think it absolutely, that data follows along with what we're seeing. And your managed services, if you're controlling your costs and you have the ability to increase price, your margins should be pretty good on managed services.
Yeah, I found that number less surprising. I've been watching the 2020 or the State of the Channel surveys as we've done them over the years, where this number of people who say they even offer managed services, and historically, even last year, it was 65%. So better than half, but certainly a good chunk left to go. And now in 2020, it's nearing, actually a little over 80% now. Do you think that is that number surprising to you, or do you think we're going to see that number just gradually continue to increase all the way up?
There are people who just don't want to do it or can't do it well, that are comfortable doing break-fix work, and maybe with some other components in there. And you know what? To the rest of the world, I say, who cares? Let them work the way that they work best. And there will be clients that fit, always. I think, as we try to evangelize MSP services, it almost was stupid. Work the way that you want to work, and the way that makes sense for your clients, that you think makes sense for your clients. I may meet with one of your clients and they may find that my method works better than what they've been doing, right? I don't know. I think interestingly enough, I've seen some clients go backwards a little, that are asking about time and materials and or block hour arrangements, which is interesting, with maybe a small set of managed services. I think we'll still see, I think we're going to see the core break fix people stay because it's what they want to do. And I'll see with the people, and I think those are more individuals and small organizations. But I know of someone, just for the record, who has a $8 million break fix business in a specific vertical and is crushing it with high margins. So it is a profitable business. To me, he's the exception, not the norm. I think the norm is the smaller organization that wants, I don't want to use the word lifestyle business, wants to do things just a certain way. But people that are serious about growing their business know that managed services is the way to do it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of hodgepodge out there, though, Matt. I'm seeing, like, you'll visit with a prospect and you'll ask them about what they're getting now or what's been put in front of them. And I joke, I'm like, well, this is included unless it's the third Tuesday of the month and it's raining and you're standing on one leg, and then that's excluded and there's a fee or it's by the hour. there's still not that apples to apples. You get all of this, flat monthly fee, you're good. And I hate the term all you can eat because I think that's stupid. But there's a hodgepodge of so many different variables, and the people that are struggling with an offering that makes sense for the client and for them. They're trying all these different things, and they're overcomplicating it, and it's frustrating to the client. That's what I see.
Yeah, if you're gonna make a weird variables for exclusion and inclusion, I'm a fan of if you can pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time, then it's included, and everyone else it's not included.
Yep.
That's Rich. What do you think of that approach?
Let's open that up to the listeners if anyone has tried that and see what kind of success they've had.
There's a lot of data in here, Rich. I'm going to ask you in a second to point out one thing that you found interesting. I will go first. I was reading about how security. We all know security is a major growth area for the channel as we go forward. But there's this other little thing called IoT. And while it's not affecting everybody, the growth potential there is pretty crazy. And it's saying that will reach 1.1 trillion in spending over the next 3 years, which is a mind-boggling number, even bigger than security. Vince, are you doing any IoT? Do you see that kind of growth potential there?
Anyone who's listening that knows me is laughing their butt off right now because they know how much I hate the term IoT to begin with. Like I don't know who came up with the term because I think it's dumb as well. Like it
was Rich. Blame him.
I wish.
To answer your question, I make fun of things I actually like all the time. Like I'm a CrossFitter, right? But I make fun of CrossFit all the time because people who do CrossFit typically brag about it, which makes it that much more fun to make fun of. Like, hey, you want an exercise? Cool. So I make fun of IoT, but I totally believe in it, and I'm using it as a consumer. Managed service providers have been doing IoT for years, and I can point all the way back to Level Platforms, which is an RMM vendor that sold to AVG, and a partner that was managing sensors on refrigerators where they were keeping dairy products. IoT, that's what that is,
that's what it
right?
Is. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's anything new, and I think there's a big niche for that. We're not focusing on it. I think managed service providers, we get hung up on are you asking me to manage your Nest thermostat in your office? No, that's not really what people are asking. The industries that we're in right now, we're not doing or going after or spending time on a bunch of IoT. Or drones, which is something I feel like CompTIA, for whatever reason, is all into the whole drone thing right now. And I'm always a little bit behind, I guess. Maybe it's because I'm a slow learner. But to answer your question, no, we're not. Is the potential there? Yes, and I think it's very verticalized, where it really can make a big difference. Like think about smart cities and areas or certain industries like refrigeration. We talked to a company recently that had a lot of that for meat packing, and it's like, whoa, okay, so we got to make sure the refrigerators don't dip in temperature, right? And we have sensors and we're monitoring that. We're not doing that specifically, but I see a ton of potential for it for people who want to get into it.
Very cool. And Rich, any in one specific number, percentage change that you found particularly surprising, and then we'll move on.
I don't know if I would call it surprising. It was interesting to me, and it's something we'll keep an eye on it for next year. So I mean, we've been talking for a long time about the skills gap in IT and how difficult it is to find people and it's just a very challenging hiring climate for channel pros right now. We went out and we asked a bunch of questions about hiring plans for the coming year. One of the things we asked, are you expecting to pay higher salaries for your technicians? And the percentage of readers forecasting higher salaries for technicians dropped from 43% last year to 34% this year, even though the percentage of people saying that they're planning to add headcount is about the same. So headcount, employee count, that's growing. It's continuing to grow. People are apparently feeling a little bit less pressure, though, to pay more for the people on their payroll right now. Is that a sign that conditions in the hiring market, the labor market, are easing a little bit out there for one reason or another, which would be welcome news, I think, for a lot of MSPs and resellers out there. That was something that caught my attention, and I'll be curious to see what we see next year.
Indeed, we will. So we will put a link to this. And actually, every story that we talk about here on the show, we have a show page at channelpronetwork.com for this episode. It's 135 in this case. So go there, and we have links to all of the news stories and the state of the channel. There is a lot of numbers in here, folks. We are just scratching the surface on this. So make sure you go find those links and go and read through so you can get all the details and all the information. Same with all the other news stories that we've talked about. If you're watching on YouTube, pop up in the description area, and we'll put links to all of the stories in there so you can kind of follow along as we go. Last story that we're going to talk about, I think, real briefly, Rich, is a story from Colleen Fry, who we've had on in the past. It's about putting the CO in managed services. So this is CO. This is carbon and oxygen into managed services. Is that what we're doing?
Not so much. No, this is more about a model that you may have heard about, some people may have heard about, called co-managed IT. And it's something, it's a topic that has come up in conversations with MSPs increasingly over the course of the last, say, 2 years or so. But really just relatively recently, I've been hearing more and more often about MSPs and really leading edge, high growth, high profit MSPs having success in this area. And just last month at a conference I was attending, Rob Ray, the Vice President of Business Development at Data, was talking about how they're seeing a lot of success with co-managed IT among their partners right now. So what is co-managed IT? Well, basically the idea is instead of you as an MSP being the outsourced IT department for the customer you serve, you're working with a customer big enough to have, if not an IT department, then maybe an IT person or two, and you're actually kind of sharing those responsibilities. Now, there are a bunch of different models in terms of how this works. We have come across people who essentially take the stack of tools, the RMM and the PSA and the other tools that they use internally. They get the customer set up on all those tools. And for the most part, the customer's IT people take over and do the day-to-day management. And they kind of call upon the MSP when they maybe find themselves with a need for assistance, a question they can't answer. We've seen models where co-managed IT works such that everybody is sharing the same set of tools. The MSP is handling all the tier 1 tickets. They only kind of hand things over to the IT department when an escalation needs to happen beyond tier 1. We have even seen, there's a guy named Stephen Banks, who is an MSP in my corner of the world up here in the Pacific Northwest, who is essentially, and you were just talking about the virtual CIO model, Vince. Stephen, for one of his clients, basically is they have him, I believe, on their executive roster down as the CTO. He really kind of runs the IT department over there, and it's kind of a co-managed IT model. He's supervising IT employees who work for the customer. He also obviously has his own team performing some of the functions there. So, there are definitely some issues. This is not the easiest thing to just kind of dive into. From a sales perspective, the number one problem you're going to encounter is the question from the customer's IT department: aren't you just trying to get me fired? Like, why should I hire you when you're just going to get me fired? So you need to have an answer to that question and be able to explain to them, I'm not going after your job. I'm trying to make your job easier, free up time that you can use to do things that are going to be more beneficial to the company. You got to be really good about communication, because if you are sharing IT responsibilities with your customers, you guys need to be in contact with each other and working with each other very effectively, sharing information and so on. So there are definitely some things to be learned, but I think the big benefit that a lot of MSPs experimenting this with are encountering is that it enables them to begin to kind of move up market. There are a lot of MSPs who avoid the larger SMB clients out there because they don't really want to deal with a company that has an IT department, and they know it can be a hard sales job, et cetera. But here's a way that some people are actually having some success moving into those bigger customers, and dealing with larger endpoint counts, user counts, and so on, without encountering that friction, that conflict with IT, basically partnering with the IT department.
It seems like it might be kind of making things a little more complicated having your customers' hands in the peanut butter with you. So, Vince, do you like to share peanut butter with your customers?
No. I was on that panel that Rich was talking about. I was at that same event. And by the way, before I forget, I know this is derailing us for the IoT conversation. Luis Alvarez, the vertical market I'm talking about, he was at that event and he was talking about IoT. And he's talking about farming. He's talking about wineries. There's also grow facilities where you've got sensors on plants and things. So I just wanted to tie up that in a bow for listeners. Those are verticals where there's a lot of sensors, and there's a partner out there, Luis Alvarez, is doing it really well. And he was at this event. At the session that Rich is talking about here, Bob Coppage was on that panel, and he has, written several books, and almost we'll make fun of him and call him the grandfather of co-managed IT. I was asked if we'd been successful with it, and I said, no, it's hard. You've got to be very careful. And that's not a negative attitude. That is a pragmatic attitude of you can succeed at it, but we've struggled with it. So there are so many ways to do this. You can do the low-level stuff like, hey, we're going to be your help desk, and then you've got your net admin team and your CTO and maybe a CIO or an IT director. Or you can say, you have the grunt work. You do all the low-level stuff. We don't want your job. Let's take some things off your plate, escalate to us. Let's give you all the back end. But then when you get the customers that are that size, some of them are like, well, we want your resources, but we want to use the tools we use. Okay, how does that work for your team if this 300-person company uses Sophos and this one uses Symantec and this one has Fortinet? Like, how do you support all those environments the way that you do? So my word of caution to people, like, we would love to do it. We've got to find the right formula and be able to do it in a standardized fashion. And if you're going to dip your toe in the water, just make sure you're very, very careful with it, because it can succeed and be really profitable, as Bob Coppage is experiencing, or you can struggle and create a nightmare for yourself. We've seen both ends of it. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity. You just have to do it right. It's very important that you know what you're doing when you get into it.
Yeah, it's I think a sign of how leaky my brain has become, Vince, that I completely forgot that you were on that panel. But you were, and boy, what perfect timing. The only reason we're talking about this right now is because this article happened to appear on the ChannelProNetwork.com website this week. But yeah, actually, it's just perfect to have you here to discuss that. Yeah, one of the people quoted in that story kind of likens the co-managed IT model to the virtual CIO concept, which came up in something you were talking about earlier on that I actually wanted to follow up on just real quickly, which is just that you said, that used to be a differentiator for you. Now everybody is saying at least that they do that. Are they actually kind of doing that, or has that become a term that everybody feels like they can put on their business card?
It is a term because, and that gets into a sales discussion. I hate being the first one in because we talk about technology roadmap and CIO and all of that. Then the prospect asks the next guy, and he said, "Oh yeah, we do that too." No, they don't. They wait till the customer says, "Hey, we're budgeting for next year. Do we need any new computers?" And the partner says, "Oh yeah, you do. You should replace 4," and they think that's CIO services. So I would say, Rich, that the real good ones are doing it and they understand what it is, but there's a huge contingency that aren't doing it. But everyone now is saying they are, and we have to be very good in our sales message of clearly articulating what that true service is. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Also on the co-managed thing, what's really fascinating is we have a client right now who brought us in, and he is asking me advice on what he should do if he should hire an IT director. And in their format, what we actually are providing to the table for him, I said, I don't know. I think there's a co-managed opportunity. You have a guy here and you have these big corporate initiatives. I think where we can add value is around projects. He's the shoulder tap guy who's providing your users that great experience. I don't think we should mess with that. I also don't think we are your strategy people. They're about to grow from 200 to 400. Are we the right fit to provide strategy for them? I would say no way. They need somebody there full time. And that was my counsel to them. What virtual role could we serve? We could serve a virtual IT director who talks to the CIO and says, okay, that's what you want to accomplish business-wise. Here's some tools and solutions that I think will do it. So that's just an example of in co-managed, I don't think there is a box that everything fits into. And so now how does that scale for my company? Like, oh, for this client, we're going to give them project services and virtual IT director. We're not doing help desk. We're not doing monitoring, right? So hopefully that gives you like a picture of all the different pieces of the puzzle that there are that you've got to make sure you got covered.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting point and an interesting wrinkle to the story, basically, that scalability question you're talking about there, because I do think what co-managed IT is, how it could benefit an end user is going to vary from company to company, which is great. I mean, the nice thing about this whole co-managed IT option, basically, is it means you no longer have to say no to a customer big enough to have an IT department necessarily. But if you're working out a sort of customized business model or contract with each customer that you do this with, that can be a little bit difficult to manage.
Yeah, and I'm not saying like maybe Bob in Ohio, maybe they have their core deal, and here's what it is: take it or leave it. I think industry-wide, it's not mature enough to know, like, people haven't figured that out completely yet, what works. I know that every time we talk to a prospective client about it, they all want different things. So I found it challenging to standardize anything in a co-managed environment at that level.
Very cool. All right. Well, we are going to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to have an interview with Alex Hoff from Auvik, talking about network vendor diversity. It should be a fascinating conversation. Stick around. We will be right back. Hey, and we're back with part 2 here of ChannelPro Weekly. We have a special guest interview segment this week. He is the Chief Product Officer at Auvik, Alex Hoff. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, thank you very much for having me today.
So I know we got a lot that we want to talk about today, primarily around the realm of network vendor diversity. But for those who are not familiar with you or with Auvik, can you tell us a little bit about you and what Auvik does?
Sure, I guess I'll touch a little bit on what Auvik does. So we are a network management platform focused on MSPs. We help MSPs get better visibility into the networks that they manage. So whether that be understanding the switches, the routers, the firewalls, how they're all interconnected together, the network topology, and then just being proactive to try and understand if something goes wrong. Let's get those technicians the right information so they can troubleshoot.
Very cool. Now, so Rich, the topic at hand is network vendor diversity. Do you want to kind of bring up how this topic kind of came up and why he's here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the issue of network vendor diversity is something that Auvik has been studying for a little while, actually. So, in their role as a network management vendor, working with a lot of different MSPs, they have access to a lot of data about how many different network vendors MSPs out there are dealing with. And so they pulled some of that data together in 2018 and issued a first network vendor diversity study. They had a follow-up study for 2019 that came out late last year. Full disclosure, I was invited to participate in a webinar about that study in the fall last year. And Alex was the host of that, and he was kind of firing questions at me and a number of other panelists who were on there. And I kind of thought to myself, I actually want to hear what you think about some of this stuff, because you're deeper into networking certainly than I am. So I've been kind of looking forward to this opportunity to get into this topic with you, Alex, for a while.
Yeah, thanks. So, let's just back up for a second and kind of set the stage. So, yeah, there's people who are MSPs, they manage computer networks, they've got firewalls, switches, routers, access points, SD-WAN, all these different technologies to facilitate connectivity for the end user clients, whether that be out to the internet now to host those hosted SaaS applications, or direct into Microsoft Azure or Amazon, whatever favorite cloud provider you have. But fundamentally, you need that internet connectivity. And our role in this ecosystem is to try and help MSPs get visibility into what's happening on those networks, make sure they're running smoothly. So during that journey, I would say over the last 8 years of building this business, we've encountered 124 different vendors. So let's just take a moment to digest that. How many operating systems do we support today? Mac, Windows, maybe a Linux or two, but pretty much it's Mac and Windows, or Mac and Windows, and a couple of Androids or whatever. But it's a very narrow ecosystem when it comes to the desktop environment, the server environment. On the networking side, it is massive, and everyone's got their little unique niche on the world. And we've seen the big boys, Cisco, HP, continue to be the dominant vendors in this space. But what we're seeing year over year now is that it's changing. And I think, when Rich and I had an opportunity to catch up at Frankly MSP earlier this year, we just kind of was just rifling, chit-chatting back and forth about what we were seeing with the increase in certain numbers of vendors, which was contrary to our thesis. We thought there would be consolidation. We thought, driven by just general M&A of network vendors, we would see consolidation. Driven by the MSP's desire to consolidate the number of vendors they manage, we thought we would see less. Because if you believe in any of the thought leadership in the MSP space about less is more, standardization is key to growth and efficiency, that there should be less vendors in the ecosystem. But that's not what we're seeing.
Yeah, let me call out some numbers from that 2019 study that will kind of help people understand what we're talking about here, because some of these numbers are incredible to me. So you looked at firewalls, routers, switches, and access points. We'll start with firewalls. There are 50 different firewall vendors out there that the MSPs you folks know are dealing with right now. 73 different router vendors. And Cisco accounts for 66% of the router market in your data sample. But that leaves 34% of the market and 72 different vendors kind of fighting it out for that, which is kind of amazing. And that 66% Cisco figure there is down from 77% the year before. Diversity is increasing in the router segment. 103 different access point vendors, up from 70 the year before. 124 different switch vendors, up from 102. Collectively, Cisco and HP account for 65% of that. But you've got 122 different vendors fighting for that remaining third of the market there. Over 70% of MSPs are managing 4 or more network vendors, according to your data. In the medium MSP space, it's typically in the range of 7 or more. Larger MSPs, 10 or more. These are huge numbers, and they're getting bigger, Alex.
Yeah, so what's really interesting to me is the relative shifts. Now, I'll back up for a second and say, hey, there is a ton of measurement bias here. We are looking at the Auvik ecosystem. The Auvik ecosystem grew, I don't remember the quoted numbers from the report, but it grew dramatically year over year. And so, there's that combined with the fact that we're always investing in the product to do better identification, because as we take on a new MSP that has a new client, we need to be able to support that stuff. So I will predicate this by saying, there might not be 24 new vendors this year compared to last. It might be that we just identified them or run into new environments where our MSPs are now, doing their thing, winning new business in new segments of the market, larger customers, different areas. And so I'll say that. But that being said, the relative shifts are really interesting. And so you and I talked about the routers. Routers, I would say, are they're on the decline, just in general, in terms of total number of units. Now, the shift is changing because we're shifting technologies. Routers are a thing of the past in the sense that they were often deployed by the telcos, the cable companies to provide that MPLS connectivity, site-to-site VPNs, technologies of yesterday. I'm taking a very bold statement there. But as the world moves to SD-WAN, you start to see these new entrants that we are bucketizing in the router space, but they're not the traditional routers that you're used to seeing in the office environment. And in fact, the other thing I would say is a headwind against the router space is much of the capabilities are embedded in the firewalls. Firewalls can route, firewalls have SD-WAN, firewalls have VPN tunnels that kind of negate the need for a dedicated routing platform. So, I don't want to spend too much time on the routing world because I think we're seeing an emergence of new technologies that, I hate the word disrupting, but it is disrupting that way of doing business and now using a new technology to achieve a similar outcome. What was interesting to me on the firewalls was, SonicWall has been number one for a very long time. They've been in this space for 20 plus years, but entrants like Meraki are growing. And in fact, they're now in, I think it's third place in our ecosystem, growing from 9% market share to 15% market share. Like that to me is an astronomical growth when you're talking about scale. It's not like, hey, we added 1 million in firewalls. They grew their percent penetration in the market quite dramatically. And so to me, that's quite interesting. I think there's the desire, or they've hit on the desire that people just want easier to manage products that just work, like just make it work. And that's part of Auvik's go-to-market function is, hey, we just make your network work. That being said, Meraki is a fantastic product suite. And we see them doing the same thing in the access point space. They make good enterprise grade equipment that's easy to use, easy to manage. Comes at a price though.
So we should probably take a step back, and this will probably be obvious to most of the people who are listening or listening to or watching this podcast. But I mean, what are the implications as vendor diversity in the networking space increases and MSPs find themselves dealing with lots of different networking vendors, segment by segment, different ones, maybe an access point versus a firewall, et cetera. What are the implications for managed service providers who have to deal with this increasing diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. If you believe the service leadership types of groups of the world, the peer groups, Gary Pika, all of the lessons that these guys share really is around standardization, and best practices are an effective way to scale your business. You should have a best practice for password management. You should have a best practice for AV, for patching, that you should have only one way to do things, and you should document that. And I think that's what we were expecting to see in the networking side. We were expecting MSPs to say, hey, look, I can't manage 7 different firewall vendors because my team then needs to know how to manage 7 different firewall vendors. And if you've ever had the luxury or pleasure of configuring a firewall, they're all different. They all have different concepts. There's almost no standardization across the industry. That you have to then train them. And so you think about if an issue comes into your service organization, hey, we can no longer access this resource, maybe a firewall rule changed. You want your lowest cost technician to be able to triage and resolve that issue as quickly as possible. You do not want your tier 3 or your MSP owner doing that because that's expensive. And so to the extent that you had a single vendor that you managed, you would write down the best practices for changing passwords, changing firewall rules, adding subnets, adding wireless SSIDs. You would have best practices articulated so that your team doesn't have to think. Your team is clearly capable figuring it out. I mean, you've hired intelligent people, but you don't want them, largely you don't want them thinking when it comes to troubleshooting. You want them to do, right? And you want to use tools to automate as much of that as possible. But standardization makes it so much easier and better. So that's why it matters. It matters because you can't waste your team's time figuring out things over and over again. You want to have a best practice in place, reduce the amount of time it takes to do a task.
Out of curiosity, Vince, does any of this kind of resonate with you and what your company is dealing with? I mean, do you find yourself struggling at all with network vendor diversity?
A little. I mean, some of it does. I mean, I disagree. I want everybody to think. I want them to use their heads and be able to troubleshoot properly. I find that automation tool vendors believe that you can automate everything, and our experience says in the real world you can't.
I'm not arguing that. We can't automate everything.
There's so many things that a technician just has to look at. I think that it depends on the focus of the MSP too, right? So we are standardizing on a set of tools to make their lives easier. I couldn't, Alex is right. I mean, and hearing these numbers of all the different vendors out there is mind-boggling. And we've worked hard over the years to standardize on just a couple. And you either get Datto networking or you get Meraki. Those are your choices, right? If we're going to work together. And when we get client pushback, we're willing to walk if we need to, because the point is if you want me to guarantee you results, then you have to use the tools that we know work. Otherwise, we might as well just Band-Aid and duct tape things and hope for the best. So they don't have to do it right away, but there has to be a roadmap for it. And I think our focus is on as few of vendors as possible with the right products, a little bit of choice depending on need and price point. But yeah, things are getting more complicated, not simpler, and having tools such as Auvik to help manage a network and devices, especially for your mid-sized to larger clients, is where it really starts to pay off. Multi-site, where you've got a lot of networking and wireless gear. I mean, honestly, we parted ways with a client several years ago that, not by our own choice, but that if Auvik existed then, maybe they'd still be a client now. Who knows? We didn't have the right tool to help us solve their networking issue, which just real briefly was tons of wireless issues in a building where every office suite had wireless. And so while you may have your own configuration right, who knows how many other signals are coming from other office suites. And anyway, I mean, we do see it, but we try to mitigate it by standardizing our clients on just a few number of tools and vendors.
So I would say
I want to come back to remediation strategies or just strategies for dealing with this issue. But let's talk just a little bit, Alex, about what we discussed on your webinar, which in part one of the topics was just what's behind all of this. And you were talking about SD-WAN before. I mean, from my perspective, and I remember discussing this on the webinar, that's one of the big issues driving diversity. I find myself writing about companies. Again, just earlier on the show, we talked about Untangle, which is not a name that comes up or used to come up a lot in the context of networking. But for a good solid year now, they've had their own SD-WAN firewall. And there are other names like Vince mentioned Datto networking, relatively new to the networking space. So there are a lot of these companies that are coming into the market right now. SD-WAN is driving a lot of that. But I mean, what would you say in general maybe accounts for this increase in diversity we're seeing?
So I think it's hard to put it on one thing. What's driving SD-WAN? It's the desire to lower complexity and cut out the ISP, which was charging you a ton of money for an MPLS link. If you can avoid that, you would. And I don't want to put words in Vince's mouth, but if he can do right by his clients and save them money, I'm pretty sure he's incented to do that, to make sure he delivers a better experience. Like, I loved what he was saying about having the two standards. That's what all MSPs should aspire to do. It's hard. It is hard to turn away business. So I applaud him for that, because that's how you get scale, because your team knows how to debug things. They know how to configure it. So it's hard to point at any one reason. There's more vendors. You're starting to see, there's virtually no barrier of entry to build a switch anymore. It's you find an ODM in Asia and you slap your logo and off you go. The real differentiation's no longer in the chipsets, either Broadcom or Marvell. The differentiation comes to the software layer and creating an integrated experience for a unique segment. So I think that's part of it as well.
Hey, Alex, as time goes on, in other industries and other markets, whenever you see this massive increase in diversity and different ways of doing things, there does seem to be a pushback by the end users, and in this case would probably be by the MSPs, to say, hey, we need to standardize a little bit cross industry for everyone's own sanity. Do you see something like that happen, or do you see more diversity taking place, especially as more networking goes software defined and everybody runs with it?
So you'd think a rational set of people would believe that standardization is a good thing. I don't know why my business would exist if that was true, but if that wasn't true, but it isn't. In fact, with vendors like Meraki, Datto, all of them who have new cloud APIs or REST APIs at the device level, the standardization is diverging, not converging. It's good that they have the APIs available, but none of them follow the same format. None of them put the same consistent sets of data. SNMP is still the most reliable source of data, and that's like a 25-year-old technology. And I would call it far from perfect. I'd love to see standardization. Because I still think that there's opportunities for vendors like ourselves to exist solving different problems, not just acquiring data. So, I think the best thing that an MSP could do is just to pick one of them and partner up and put that path, because it's like largely don't innovate on this, innovate on something else. This is not any more innovation. It's not like the first wireless network we're installing. We're at Rev 6 right now. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Matt, MSPs are notorious on the bright, shiny object and not looking at what really makes a difference, right? So like Alex was saying, anybody can make a switch, slap their logo on it. Hey, it's ours. It's cool. It's new. And then they add like one little incremental feature, and they get the MSP who's hooked on the bright, shiny object because they're a technologist, and they jump ship instantly. They create more work for their staff for ripping and replacing, and they don't look at the big picture in terms of how much is enough, and is this doing what we need it to do? I think there's always going to be a better product out there, but does it make sense to do it? And are you getting enough bang for the buck in terms of what this incremental feature is that it makes sense? So, I wish MSPs would just like pick your horse, and unless they are losing every race, man, just go in and stay with it. We're working with an antivirus vendor right now that I won't name. Are they the best right now? I don't think so, but it changes all the time. One time they were the best. Now this one's the best. Now they're the best again. And you can get caught up in vendor switching with the latest and greatest all the time. What you should be looking for is reliability and something that you can standardize on and scale, and then just know that you're going to get the support from that vendor. It may not always be the bright, shiny object and the most whiz-bang thing. But I think that's why you see 150,000 different vendors and switches and access points, because people are willing to buy all the different varieties of them, and they're making their lives more complicated, not less. Even though they think when they move, this is going to be easier for me. We're going to support this client better. It's going to give this person this. And in the end, the incremental benefit is not worth it. And it makes their lives worse.
Yeah, like I'll jump in on that and agree. Like switching is no longer a differentiated technology, maybe except for data center, which is still evolving. But you buy a 48 port giggy switch, that's all you need. What a business owner like Vince needs is good supply chain, reliable delivery. He needs support. He needs warranty. You don't need the shiniest little new feature. I totally agree with that statement. So you need the rest of it needs to support your business. And that's what the little vendors have a hard time doing unless they have a unique niche.
So would you say that's true for all segments of networking, or is there other parts that are maybe a little more conducive to trying to stay going for the bright shiny object, say in firewalls, for example, because that's very security related, or any other segment like that?
It goes across every MSP tool there is.
Not going to argue that.
You're poison, Matt. It goes across every single tool there is. And there's always a new tool every day. I mean, this conversation around vendors too. It's like, listen, I talk about tool bloat a lot. Rich and I have talked about that. Like, if you're not careful, your MSP offering is going to explode, and your client looks at it and says, yeah, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that. And your technicians can't keep up in delivering service because, you know, you've got so many tools. I was at a session once at a conference where the guy proudly stood up and said they use 23 tools. It's like, how do you function? How does your staff function with 23 tools? You know, which ones make the most sense? And I think that's why it's so lucrative to sell to MSPs, because man, we go hook, line, and sinker, man. Put a shiny object in front of us and show us how it's going to save us 8 seconds, and we buy it as an industry.
I can do it for 7, Vince.
Yeah.
Apparently, you also use a lot of duct tape in your business too, Vince. So is there any particular color or brand that you prefer?
We avoid using duct tape. We refuse to work with the clients that want us to use duct tape, or we'll use it temporarily until their roadmap that we lay out for them will allow us to standardize. We refuse to use duct tape.
So Alex, what Vince is doing in terms of standardization around 2 vendors, that's kind of a best practice from your standpoint. You know, as you go into a new account as an MSP, you should just kind of limit the options that they have to these 1, 2, or 3 vendors. But I mean, for an existing account, or even for a new account, obviously, because there's going to be some networking gear in place there. Do you have any recommendations in terms of how to get from where that customer is today to your standard set of vendors that you support? That's got to be a difficult conversation and a difficult process.
Yeah, I think Vince can maybe answer that, but let me give you an analogy first. Imagine you're hiring a general contractor to redo your kitchen, and you said, hey, hiring you to redo my kitchen, looking forward to that. Here's all the tools and here's all the cabinetry. I want you to go install it. Do you think you're going to have a good outcome, or do you want to hire someone who's going to come in and deliver you an outcome, which is a new kitchen? And I think if you can wrap around, you know, if you believe and agree with me that giving the general contractor the tools and the materials to build it for you is a bad idea, which I totally think it is, and the same is true in the MSP space. You have to trust the people you're bringing in. And I think in order to get them to go from point A to point B, you need to give them rational data so they can make intelligent decisions to support what you're saying. And so, yeah, you need to go from, you know, whatever vendor you have to what we have. Here's why it makes us better, but here's also why it improves your, and here's why some of your other stuff doesn't work as well as it used to. So if you can support some of it with data, I think that's good, but it's not easy. People are irrational. I just bought this thing. Why should I replace it? That's a very hard conversation to have. Vince, you do this more than I do. I don't sell to MSPs. I sell to the end clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes like we get on calls like this or panels, it's like, oh yeah, you know, we standardize on these 2 and that's all we do, or we don't work with clients. Well, that is the truth. At the same time, we don't fire the client immediately, right? So the 65-person client we just brought on last year that had a mismatch of everything, it's now almost a year later, and because of the way their roadmap works, we're just getting them standardized, right? We had priorities, a list of priorities. So the reality is, at least for a period of time, we have to support at times whatever the client has due to their budget, due to time constraints, whatever it may be. And, you know, you try not to strong arm people, but even standardizing, right? I gave you the Meraki Datto example. Well, there may be a scenario where let me throw SonicWall in there because that makes more sense, right? Or man, I really want them to replace this 48-port HP switch, but because of how we like to standardize, but the thing works great. There's nothing wrong with it. Why, you know, like, I want to spend the customer's money like it's mine. I'm not going to squeeze them to replace it just for my benefit. Does it take any extra skill to manage that that HP switch versus, you know, a data one? So I think, you know, there are always going to be those scenarios where, you know, you are supporting a whole bunch of different stuff, and that's why you need the right tools to help make your life easier there. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Well, that approach makes sense. It sounds like you're saying, like, if they have something there and it works, at some point, it's going to have to get replaced. And when we do replace it, it's going to be within our standard
right.
batch
There are negotiables and non-negotiables, and we want to be reasonable with those things, right? If somebody just put in a Fortinet firewall, I'm not going to rip it out and put in our standard because. We'll wait till renewal time and say with that Fortinet or whatever, pick your firewall, SonicWall, WatchGuard. Okay, they're coming up for their annual renewal, and now it was going to cost them $2,000 to renew. Okay, now let's make a budget decision, put in our standard at that time, and it's a nice clean wash.
Makes sense. All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this particular topic. I know probably, as Vince is saying, this is something that he sees as an MSP. I'm sure lots of other MSPs are dealing with this massive amount of variety and diversity in the network space. So it's a good thing to keep top of mind and to discuss. Alex, if people are going to learn a little bit more about Auvik and a little bit more about you, where would they go?
Auvik.com. Keep it simple.
Simple enough. And we'll put a link to that on our show notes page. So with that, we are going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to have a end of the show regular roundup of features that we do. So stick around and we will be right back. All right, and we are back with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly, where we just had a great interview with Alex Hoff from Auvik. Fascinating conversation. There's so many directions we could go in talking about networks in general, and as events, as you know, networking is just it's a big elephant to digest if you try to eat it. That analogy didn't work very well. How do you think that interview went? What did you get out of that was interesting?
I think the numbers and the statistics of the different brands and volume of different products, and that's where Auvik, they're a cool company, and what they're trying to do and fit a need. We talked about standardizing, but for them, you might think like, well, maybe they don't want people to standardize, right? The more vendors out there, the more value they bring. So I think, my big takeaway too is that things are not getting simpler as we think they are. Networks are getting more complicated. And the data was pretty interesting, and so was the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich, what did you glean out of that was interesting?
No, I mean, I think I'm with Vince, and it's why I highlighted some of those numbers in there. Is just, I don't know what guesses I would have made if you had asked me, how many switch vendors or access point vendors out there, but I doubt I would have come up with 3-digit numbers in some of those markets. And the trend is on the upswing. There are only more people getting in, at least based on what the data shows them at Auvik right now. So I mean, those are really kind of staggering numbers, and it really does get to a critical profitability issue for MSPs. And then, as we were just discussing, a very complicated client relationship management issue in terms of how you eliminate some of that diversity in a way that's going to be acceptable to your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very cool stuff. We are going to go on to our museum pick. So, Vince, did you know that I have a hobby? I guess some would call it. Many would call it a disease. But I have an inability to throw anything electronic away. So I have a lot of stuff laying around my house.
Well, I mean, are those cassette tapes and CDs behind you?
Well, right behind me here, I have some gaming stuff. We're going to talk about a gaming thing today, actually. But this is some Nintendo NES games. I got Genesis over there, PlayStation, all kinds of consoles and video game systems over there. And and that actually is a perfect question because it leads right into my museum pick for this week. And I hope I haven't done this on the show before. I was looking back to the notes and I didn't see it. And our upcoming tour for our live events this year is called the Game Theory Tour. So if those who know the ChannelPro forum, we usually try to have a theme with it to have a little bit of fun. And this year we chose game theory. So a lot of the materials have like some cool like references to arcade games, and maybe some fun shirts, and we've got some things like that. So I've been thinking a lot about gaming lately, especially older gaming. In some cases arcade gaming, but I was looking at the museum and I was thinking, let's talk about a game platform that lasted forever and everything was stacked against it back in the day. If you really look at what this thing was, and so I'm going to do a classic here. It's not going to be one that's going to knock anybody's socks off or surprising, but we're going to talk about the Game Boy. Vince, did you ever have one of these?
I did not. No.
Are you a big gamer?
No. Used to be a little bit. Sports games, though. Like
Sports games?
I'll drink a beer and beat you in John Madden football or hockey.
You probably would. I'm pretty good at the NHL games, so we'll see. But back in the day, there was a renaissance heyday of video gaming. The Nintendo had their NES out in the United States, and it was a big, massive success. And they wanted to have a handheld video game system. So Gunpei Yokoi was his name, the guy who came up with this. He came up with the Game Boy. And everything that you would think about the Game Boy, it didn't seem like it was going to be much of a gaming platform. It was a 4-color monochrome screen. It was not backlit. It was actually kind of small compared to a lot of things back in the day. But it was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first to have an interchangeable cartridge system. So you buy a platform and then you could buy individual games just like the Nintendo. And it's not a very powerful system by any means whatsoever, but it ended up being a platform that lasted for years and years and years and years. So it came out in 1989, excuse me. I got mine in 1991. And this was the original one that I got back then. But it lasted well for 8 years, almost a decade with new titles coming out for it. And there was a couple different ones that iterations of the Game Boy. There was the Game Boy Pocket, which made it a little bit smaller. Eventually there was one called the Game Boy Color, which tried to add color into the system. But it lasted a very, very long time and had hundreds, if not thousands of games, even though it wasn't a very powerful console. Rich, did you ever play with a Game Boy? I know you're not a big gamer, but did you ever have a Game Boy?
Well, I dashed out of the room real quickly when I saw this was going to be your museum pick because I got one too. And in fact, I just noticed I've still got the Nintendo baseball game cassette in there, which was my favorite. I think it came with the unit, but that was definitely my favorite game, I remember.
Excellent. So is that the original? Can you hold that up again? You don't have to talk to get the camera on you.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And it looks the same as what you held up there before.
Yeah, it looks like you're missing the little plastic cover, though. Did that fall off at some point?
Yeah, looks like it. Because I'm seeing some glue around the edges here.
So, well, that's pretty cool that you have one of these. Now, how many games do you have for yours?
Oh, gosh, probably like 3 or 4. Yeah.
So not many. And was this like a quick fad that you were going through?
No, this, so you got yours in 91. I think I got mine in 92. I was working at this very small software vendor at the time out here, and like 5-6 employees. And the boss bought everyone a Game Boy as a Christmas gift that year. And at the time, it was like, oh, okay, great. Thanks, boss. But I did kind of briefly become addicted to this thing, and especially that baseball game.
Very, very cool. And did I assume you got Tetris with it because it came with all of them? Yes. You play a lot of Tetris?
Yeah.
Well, super cool. So about how many hours would you say you spent on this thing?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I don't know. But it was there was a period of time there where that was a pretty regular sort of evening unwinding kind of activity. A little. Yeah, Tetris, definitely. I would have to go see what else I've still got in there. I know it's not just those two, but those are the two I remember.
Yeah, pretty awesome. So I looking at some old stats here, because I know this thing lasted well over a decade. They actually produced this console from, at least for the Japanese market, and it came out in North America a little later, from 1989 to 2003 is how long this thing lasted. And Rich, as you know, like this is not like super immersive gaming, but the games on it were fun because when you have all these technical limitations, good programming comes into play, and what they were able to make the Game Boy do based on its specifications were pretty incredible. And it also lasted a while on double A batteries because it wasn't backlit, so that certainly helped as well. So it's Vince, I know you're a hardware guy. It's a 4.19 megahertz processor, so we're talking, super, super fast. 8 kilobytes of RAM, 8 kilobytes of video RAM, and a display, a massive resolution display, HD, some might say, of 160 by 144.
Fancy.
It is high-end stuff. So Rich, we were talking about why we chose this one, and that's because of the Game Theory Tour that we have coming up, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to lead this into my tech pick. So it's kind of a last-minute pick, but if you don't have one of these, you can usually find used Game Boys and cartridges, but there's a big scene out there of what's called emulation. So it's being able to emulate old hardware and play it on a TV screen or whatever, and play some of these old games that may be very difficult to find. So there's a whole scene out there around emulators, which is emulating the hardware and then getting the game files and being able to experience these old games again. So if you are into that kind of thing, having a platform to do that on. So my tech pick this week is the Raspberry Pi 3. Now, Viz, have you ever played with any of the Raspberry Pis?
No. They're
basically very small, low power computers, usually RISC-based or with other low cost hardware, but they can do a lot of stuff. And they're kind of development boards. They're good for hobbyists and for tinkerers. You can get kits for it, but one of the reasons why I picked this is because there's a pretty cool software package you can get for the Raspberry Pi that's called RetroPie. And what that allows you to do is boot your Raspberry Pi 3 into this environment that's kind of like mostly pre-configured to emulate and run old games from the NES era, the Game Boy era. Now, of course, from a legality perspective, you should own the cartridge to dump your file to play the game on these, because otherwise that might be legally questionable. So naturally, you'll want to do that. As Rich, I know that you do want to be on the up and up with this. Most
of the time.
But it's a big scene, and if you haven't played with the Raspberry Pi, they're pretty low cost. They're fun. You can do a lot with them. If your goal was to just emulate the Game Boy, you could get the Raspberry Pi Zero to do that. But the Raspberry Pi 3 will let you emulate all kinds of stuff, including, and going back to the game theory thing, some of the old arcade classics of the day, because there's an emulation package called MAME that specializes in emulating arcade cabinets. So, and a lot of those, it's not like you can just go and buy an arcade cabinet. So to experience a lot of those old games you played in the arcade when you were just a wee lad, that is kind of the only way to do it. And the Raspberry Pi 3 can do that kind of stuff. So pretty neat, right?
If you're a nerd, yes.
Yes, if you like games, then yes, it's good times. Rich, we talked a little bit about the Game Theory Tour. That is coming up, here in a couple of weeks, March 6th, 5th, Rich?
5th.
March 5th in Dallas is our first 2020 ChannelPro SMB Forum event of the year, where we kick off the Game Theory Tour. Rich, why don't you tell people what is in store for them? Should they be in the Dallas area, or any of the other areas? Why don't you tell them where they're going to be and why they should go?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely, if you are anywhere even close to Dallas, you're going to want to join us March 5th for that show there. And the very first thing I'll point out, and I meant to jump in and point this out before the interview, Vince was talking about a talk he heard Luis Alvarez deliver at a conference, at the Auvik conference, actually, back in January. Luis is our guest in Dallas. He will be talking about exactly the same topic, how he is actually making money in the Internet of Things. This is not whiteboard stuff. His business is doing it today. It's very profitable for him. And he's going to go through all the details on what he does and how he does it and what makes it work. We're going to have a session on building cloud solutions. This kind of plays into something we were talking about before. If you are selling cloud products today, that's great, but you're probably not making much margin on that. We're going to have a panel of people who can tell you a little bit about how to build on that foundation into much more profitable dimensions of the cloud computing opportunity. We have another panel on managed security. And just we're going to spend some time even defining what that is, but that's another giant opportunity where combining your own services with those from partners and delivering it all as one big thing to your customers, you can really kind of expand your business beyond where it is today and some of the maybe managed networking stuff that you're doing. We're going to have a great set of peer-to-peer interviews. Our own Colleen Fry, who we mentioned before, is going to be doing one-to-one interviews with some of the folks who have appeared on the cover of our magazine within the last year or so, talking about things like hiring and retention, sales and marketing. And I'm blanking on the third topic there, but topics related to running your business successfully. And of course, Matt, you will be once again hosting another episode of the ChannelPro Game Show.
We're doing Tech Trends Feud here in 2020. It's kicking that off for the 5 cities that didn't get to see it last year. Going to be bigger and better than ever and lots of fun. I don't want to miss that. Vince, you've been to many, many of our shows. What would you recommend that people check it out?
Oh, absolutely. They're great. I've been to them in Chicago. I think I was at one in, I've been to 2 in Dallas. So yeah, absolutely. If there's one nearby you got to check it out. Great event.
Fantastic. A ringing endorsement from Vince Tinnirello. Be there or be square is what I like to say. Rich, we've got a few minutes left. Why don't you tell us what has been and what will be coming up next week?
Well, in terms of what has been, a great place to catch up on that at the end of the week is our In Case You Missed It column. It is written for us every Friday by our own James Gaskin. This week he's going to be talking about a bunch of new AI features that Microsoft added to Dynamics 365, a bunch of new features, 350 of them, in fact, that Fortinet has added to its security fabric. Some interesting and aggressive new pricing for cloud storage from Wasabi, a vendor I don't think we talk about as much as we should. And speaking of nerds, they've got a whole new team of quote-unquote head nerds at SolarWinds MSP. We'll explain what that's all about this week. Coming up next week is going to be huge for yours truly, huge for the industry. So the RSA conference, one of the biggest security conferences of the year, is taking place in San Francisco. I will be there. I have got just wall-to-wall interviews with security vendors, so lots of coverage coming from there. I will be going straight from RSA down to Long Beach for the first ASCII conference of 2020. And next week was supposed to be when the Mobile World Congress happens in Barcelona. That got canceled because of the coronavirus. But I just know that all the mobile hardware vendors out there have announcements that they're going to be making anyway, because they were planning to do that at Mobile World Congress. They'll just sort of do it online instead. So I think it'll be a big week for mobile device news as well.
Agreed. The deluge of press releases are incoming. No doubt about it. Well, very cool. Well, I'd like to thank Vince Tinnirello, CEO of Anchor Network Solutions, for being our guest host today. Vince, if people want to learn more about you and your company, and where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, they can go to our website, anchornetworksolutions.com. 2 easiest ways to get a hold of me. You can also send me an email right to vince@anchornetworksolutions.com. You will see me at CompTIA events, and you will see me at DattoCon if you attend that event as well.
Awesome. Well, everyone should keep their eyes out for you out there. And also, if you're interested in mountain climbing, maybe you can make a mountain climbing buddy. Who knows?
There you go. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
It was great having you here. Thank you so much. For those out there, if you'd like to subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly, that's the way to do it. You can get the audio version pretty much anywhere podcasts are aggregated. We're on iTunes, the Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're on Spotify now, thank goodness. We're on Stitcher. So go to your platform of choice and subscribe to us there, and then poof, new episodes just magically appear on your device so you can listen while you're in the car or going between job sites, or just have it on the background while you're working, so that way you can listen and learn and have a laugh or two with us while we go through it. You are also on YouTube if you want to watch the video version, where you can see Vince Tinnirello's bright, smiley face as he talks about things like shiny objects. He just gets a smile on his face when he talks about that kind of stuff. So you can subscribe there. If you want notifications, hit the bell and then all, and I don't know how many layers Google's put into subscribing on YouTube now. But do all that stuff, and then you can go and watch us there as well. Well worth your time. So thank you all again. This is episode 135, and we'll see you all next week.